Well, we have had a long Christmas season. I remember back in the last week of September, going through Walmart and hearing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I'm sure many of you have as well. And I'm sure there are many of us here today that have been back to the mall after Christmas, bringing back the things that are maybe the wrong size or the wrong color, or maybe they're just wrong. And here we are today, the first Sunday after Christmas. We've been building towards this for several weeks now in Advent. We build up and we wait, and during these 4 weeks of Advent, we celebrate the human side of Jesus. We focus on Mary and Joseph and the human birth that took place in a manger. We remind ourselves of how John the Baptist prepared the way. And on that magnificent Christmas, the divine cut through all of the stuff of life and came to us in a baby in swaddling clothes in a manger behind the inn. Well, today's story is anything but typical for a king. Joseph and Mary escaped to Egypt to prevent Jesus from being one of those children that were slaughtered by Herod's men. And so Mary and Joseph and Jesus fled in the night. They fled to a foreign land. They fled to a place where they were the lowest person on the totem pole, so to speak, on the social ladder. Everywhere refugees, whether it be in our own time or in Jesus' time, were on the lowest of the pecking order. Often, they could only save their lives by abandoning their homes and their communities where they were respected and where they were comfortable. Yet saving their lives comes at a cost. They had to learn a different language. They had to adjust to a different culture, to a different way of life. It's a little bit strange, this 1/3 of the lectionary series, because this story of the Holy Family leaving to go to Egypt comes before the wise men. I'll give you a hint. Next week when Diane comes, I'm sure she's going to address some of those issues. The other 2/3 of the cycle has the wise men coming before this. These wise men, these magi that we'll hear about next week, these philosophers, they came because they'd been charting the stars, because they knew somewhere around Jerusalem there was a king to be born. And they inquired to King Herod as to where this child might be so that they could pay him homage. Well, Bethlehem in this time period was nothing more than 1,000 people. And in that, only probably 20 were of male heritage of 2 years and less that Herod had targeted. The empire, though, strikes back, doesn't it? Those in power always strike back. Even this Palestinian Jewish baby boy born to poor parents. Remember, Jesus is born to some poor carpenter. Yet Herod felt threatened that somehow his political power might be put into question. Think of it. Jesus came what he came to stand for. Jesus came preaching the good news to the poor and powerless. He came healing the blind, the lame, the sick. He came welcoming the sinners and the children. He came challenging a system that focused on ritual purity and instead insisted upon compassion and love. He came eating dinner with anyone and everyone. He came saying, not blessed to the fortunate or blessed to the elite, but he came saying, blessed to the poor and blessed to the merciful. Of course, Herod didn't have any way of knowing all this that was to come. All he knew is that somewhere, someone thought that this little boy was going to be a challenge to him. It may have only been a handful of stargazers, but that was enough for Herod, king of Judea. And probably the Emperor Caesar Augustus probably felt the same way. But our church teaches us that Jesus came to be a part of us. That God, through Jesus, came to be a part of us. And that is the mystery of the incarnation. And that is at the heart of Christmas. Webster's dictionary reminds us that the incarnation is the belief in Jesus Christ as both God and human being. Isn't this a staggering irony in so many ways? That the Creator God, the one who created all of the planets, the galaxies, the stars, the earth, the sun, was on the flee from a second-rate tyrant of Herod. Let that sink in for a moment. Herod was only king because he was willing to play nice with Rome. This gives us some insight into the cost of the incarnation. That Jesus and his parents had to endure the suffering of that of a refugee. That later on, Jesus would take it a step further in his ministry and would finally die on a cross on our behalf. That God was so willing to empty God's self of power so completely that God took on the fragile human flesh and made himself vulnerable for us, for you and I. Jesus becomes this wandering Savior on the run with his parents until such a time as Herod becomes ill and dies, and then they can return. This is a hard gospel for us to hear the Sunday after Christmas, isn't it? It's a hard gospel to hear. The incarnation is more than just a beautiful baby with a glowing mother in the stable. The incarnation is much more than just the glorious visions of angels singing in heavenly melodies and shepherds running jubilantly to tell the good news. The incarnation is about God being willing to suffer and to die as a human. Ruth and I, a few years ago, had the opportunity to go to Tucson, Arizona as a part of a development conference. You see the image there. We went to with a program called Humane Borders. And it's an hour in the van south of First Christian Church along the Gila Native American community and the Mexican border. There is nothing more here than saguaro cactus, sagebrush, and sand. And it's at this narrow gap where people from South America, from Mexico, enter into our country. Now, regardless of what you think about the politics of that, think about what it might be like to cross this desert in the middle of the day. In January, when we went, it was 90 degrees. Most other months, it's probably 100 degrees or more out there every day. Now, this is a dangerous place to go, not only because of the environment, and sometimes you have people attacking you as you cross the border, but the main danger is that you might die of thirst or dehydration. Humane Borders, what they do, what their ministry is not to get so involved in the politics of immigration, but it's to take on the challenge. What the church must be to do is to hand out water. They have 35 watering stations throughout the desert with flags that go up more than 50 feet in the air so that people can know where these stations are at. Since 2001, this organization has handed out free water in these tanks. 150,000 gallons of water since that time. When we give our offering, we go to support Humane Borders and other organizations such as that. Think about it. Jesus left as an immigrant, crossed from Israel over to Egypt in the middle of a desert. I would like to have thought that someone might have reached out and handed Joseph and Mary and Jesus some water along the way. if that had been needed. Can't we do this? Imagine a world without barriers or borders. Say it with me. Imagine a world without barriers or borders. Interestingly enough, we work with a lot of Haitian congregations. More than 30 people from this congregation have gone to Haiti to learn of the reality of the Haitian people, to learn the struggles of everyday life. It's pretty tough living there. Sometimes it's a little better, sometimes it's a little worse. Since the earthquake, it's been a little bit worse, a little bit more of a struggle. And we hear stories of how people need to provide for their families, and sometimes they don't have a way to provide for their families. You can go ahead and put the image up now, if you can, here of the Haitian boat people. This is what happens when things get worse. People get on boats like this and travel for 10 days or 2 weeks sometimes to get all the way from the island of Hispaniola in Haiti to get to the shores of Florida. When you can't provide for your kids and you go for the second, third day without having enough nutrition to provide for your kids, you'll do just about anything. You might even put your family on a boat like this and try to make it to the United States. And unfortunately, our government, many times, when they catch these folks, they return them right to Haiti. Whereas the Cubans, when they make it to the southern shores of Florida, they get automatic path to citizenship. We need to be thinking about this as a people, and the church needs to be an advocate for this. We need to stand up and say, all people who have need to have access to the basics of life. Can't you imagine a world without borders and barriers? Say it with me. Imagine a world without barriers or borders. I'm going to tell you a story about Jose. Jose is a pastor of Fe, Esperanza y Amor Christian Church. Faith, Hope, and Love Christian Church in South San Diego. Not more than 5 miles from the border with Mexico. Jose and his wife came here 30 years ago. And I'm not going to tell you their name because Jose is not here legally. I'm going to be completely honest. He's not here legally. He's been here 30 years. He's had 4 children, and they're all legal U.S. citizens. 2 of them are in college. Jose became a part of Casa de Oración in San Diego, became disciple. More than 20 years ago, 5 years ago, he started his own church. But not in the comfortable downtown part of San Diego, but on the margins of the immigrant community. You can go ahead and change the slide there. This is a picture of the front of his church. It's nothing more than a storefront that was once an oil changing business. You would come in the front, and then you go to the back, and you would have your oil changed. You know, when you go down underneath the car and you change the oil, that's now a baptistry. But this community has been changed by Fe, Esperanza y Amor. It's changed in such dramatic ways because behind the storefront here was nothing more than graffiti. You could walk out there and see needles from the drug addicts. If you were to go there at night, you would see prostitution. There was hopelessness. But this church, through its pastor Jose, has changed the community. They painted the walls. They picked up the needles. They began to minister with the prostitutes. The apartment complex behind this building, they've gone in there and they've met with the president of the society there in the apartment complex, and they're now having Bible study in his living room. And together they are going about changing this community. He started out 5 years ago with 5 members of his family, 5 seed members from the mother congregation. They now have more than 200 in worship on Sunday morning. They probably have more than we have here today. And they minister with the people that are coming across the border. They're ministering with immigration issues, with challenges. Jose himself can't travel more than 5 miles from this building without fear for being captivated by the police or the immigration services. How his life could change. He could go to a regional meeting. He could go to a national meeting of disciples if he could get his visa, get his passport. And that one day that will happen. Can you imagine that with me for just a second? Imagine a world without barriers or borders. Oh, come on, friends. Imagine a world without barriers or borders. We disciples have a long history. Obviously, we trace our faith back to Jesus, that first refugee. But think about it. Alexander Campbell, Thomas Campbell, Walter Scott, most of our founding fathers and mothers were first generation immigrants. When Alexander Campbell spoke in his Scottish brogue, I'm sure that they knew that he wasn't born here. They've always been. We have always been. And we always need to be a constant reminder to our greater society that the refugee, the person on the margins of society, are the people that Jesus walks alongside. We need to do the same. We need to be that advocate, because imagine a world without barriers or borders. Praise be to God.